I already did my post Justin Gaethje, Edson Barboza fight breakdown. That's already done. Recorded a podcast. It'll be done later on in a couple days. But there's something going around that I had to comment on, which is the interview with Paul Felder with Justin Gaethje after the fight, where he basically suggested them fighting, him and Karen Bryant. And Gaethje didn't take it well afterward. And what he said is he felt Karen Bryant and Paul Felder were stealing his thunder. I think those were his exact words. Paul Felder, respectfully called him out and everything. There's always going to be an issue or a problem with an active fighter calling a fight of another active fighter in his division. Always. And combat sports is the only sport where active fighters do commentary. Or if someone's fighting, an NFL player doesn't do NFL commentary during the season unless he's hurt. He doesn't have to talk about his rival team. He doesn't have to be neutral in the middle of the season. Fighters do. And the hard part is you're putting fighters, both the ones fighting and the ones doing commentary, in a really tough spot. Because when you put your broadcaster hat on, you're supposed to be neutral. You're not supposed to interject yourself as part of the narrative. As a fighter, you're supposed to do that all the time. Every time somebody puts a mic in your face, you're talking about your opponent or whatever, yourself, you're supposed to be in it 24/7. A broadcaster isn't. By definition, you're not supposed to be part of the story. Your feelings or your rivalry with that person, while it may exist, isn't supposed to be part of the narrative. And when you put an active fighter in that position, something's got to give. You have to really be careful about what hat you're wearing at what particular time. And so Paul Felder, by the way, I think an excellent broadcaster, really nice guy, great fighter. He said, well, I called him out at the end of my last fight after I won, so I wanted to be able to say it to his face, when I'm interviewing him. But when you won your fight, that's your moment to call out anybody you want. You can call out the champ, you can call out Jesus. Doesn't matter. You just won. That's your moment. When Gaethje wins, that's his moment. And what Gaethje felt is that you took his moment. A broadcaster's not supposed to get in the way and kind of put themselves in the story. And he did. And Gaethje didn't appreciate it. I understand where Paul Felder's coming from. I understand where Justin Gaethje's coming from. It's hard, man. I remember watching the Errol Spence fight last month. And on the desk, I think it was pre-fight, was Keith Thurman, who is a potential opponent for Errol Spence. And Keith Thurman said to Errol Spence, do you think this fight, winning this, makes you the number 2 welterweight in the world? Well, you know what he's saying. He's saying he's number 1. Now, Spence, to his credit, laughed it off and said, I think it makes me number 1, and everything was fine. But he could have said, go F yourself. I'm number 1, and they can get into it, which leads to a really awkward interview. So the problem with active fighters being broadcasters is the instincts you need are often totally different. When Colby Covington and Michael Bisping got into it, Covington came at everybody, but not in a way that couldn't have been pretty easily diffused. Let me give you an example. So he tells Karen Bryant and Bisping and everybody else who was on the desk at that time, oh, all my haters in one room, what excuses are you going to make now? Are you going to say that Rafael dos Anjos is too small? All you guys are making excuses. Bisping calls him a prick, and they go right into it. And it led to this confrontational, not interview, confrontational exchange. Rashad Evans one time picked against, it was the Volkan Oezdemir fight. Well, Rashad Evans had trained with Volkan Oezdemir. So he picked him against DC, who's kind of his boy. Well, post-fight, DC, when we did the interview, I was on the desk at the time, DC goes, oh, come on, man, picking Volkan Oezdemir, man, you're my boy. Well, Rashad laughed it off and said, oh, man, you won. I trained with the guy, I had to pick him. And that was about it. He ate a little humble pie. Like, as the broadcaster, you're supposed to be the one to go, yeah, you're right, I was wrong, man, great win. It's your moment. The broadcaster is supposed to go, hey, man, you got me. And you eat a little of that humble pie and you continue with the interview. You try to defuse it a little bit. A fighter doesn't do that. It's my dog Steeler, by the way. A fighter never does that. A broadcaster almost always does that. Now, there are times when a fighter just goes at you, which I've never had happen. I mean, a fighter just unreasonably goes at you. You can't stand there and just take that. I mean, abusive, you can't do that. You have to say something. But if a fighter's emotional and, you picked against him or something, you kind of have to take a step back and give them their due and give the interview. But fighters don't do that, That's how they make their living. So the instincts of a broadcaster and fighter are very different. And when to put that hat on is a tough choice, a very tough choice. And you're putting fighter broadcasters, active fighter broadcasters, in a very tough spot. And I know, when Karen Bryant says we got okay from our producers to ask that question, I'm sure she did. Especially Karen Bryant, if she's the host at the desk, everything she says and does and asks is producer driven. She helps with the script that they write, that she's reading, the ins and outs and all that stuff. But she's not making a lot of stuff up. And the question she does ask, if there's any controversy or any, we're not sure how this will go, she's going to run it by her producer completely. Now, the other line that's tough is ESPN or anybody else, you guys going at it on camera is great. In a sense, them having heat and yelling at each other, fine, great, hey, ask it. So it can hurt the interview, but it's there's never too much controversy to a lot of people. So it's tough, man. It's really hard because you're asking somebody to take off one hat and put on another. And a lot of times when you're going into broadcast, they and I mean any promotion, not the UFC, not Bellator, all of them, kind of expect fighters to know broadcast stuff, and they don't. I was thrown in with a fighter one time, and nobody told him that layout meant stop talking. Just nobody told him that. And so he's next to me, and he's talking, and the commercial's coming, and my producer's going, layout. Okay, layout. And by the end, he's yelling, layout. Guy didn't know what that meant. So he went talking all the way to commercial. Blah, 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 blah. We went into commercial. I had to tap him on the shoulder and go, you're in commercial. No one can hear you. And I go to my producer, and I hit the button. I'm like, you got to explain to him layout means stop talking. Now, as a broadcaster, I know what that means. Piggyback off that. I know what that means. Layout and counts and all that stuff. But, you have no idea what that means if you've never heard that before. So there are two different skill sets. And so you got to be really careful about which side you're on and what role you're taking at that moment, because they're not compatible. The instincts that make a great fighter, that are confrontational and aggressive and all these things, don't always make a great broadcaster, because you got to tone those things down. They had Chael Sonnen in Bellator interview, I think it was Ryan Bader, in a tournament in which they could potentially fight. It went well, but it could have gone horribly. He could have gone, F you, I'm going to be fighting you in 2 fights, and I'm going to kick your ass. Well, Chael's not going to take that. So they end up getting into a confrontation that is way beyond what most broadcasters would be comfortable getting involved in. And then, Jake Shields and Frank Shamrock got into it, and they were both active in Strikeforce at the time. And so they had this really, public, Frank Shamrock trashing him on mic and stuff. And, Jake Shields not appreciating it none too much. And, you got to take that hat off, man. You got to be a broadcaster. You can't go antagonizing the guy you're commentating, because then you seem biased and angry, and it doesn't work well. So it's always tough. It's always going to be a difficult thing when you have active fighters commentating or dealing with or interacting with fighters in their division who are also active. You got to know when to take that hat off and put it back on. So anyway, it comes down on any side of the debate you want. But those are my feelings on it, that it asks a lot. And you're always going to have these kinds of conflicts where fighters feel that their moment is taken by someone who should be helping them or talking about them or promoting them or helping them shine because they just fought. Not, hey, so you're going to fight me next, or with the Colby Covington and Michael Bisping, where they start arguing when that really should be Colby Covington's moment, Now, Colby Covington was, obviously an instigator with it, but when you instigate somebody who's got those fight instincts, they're not going to diffuse it and try and carry on with the interview. They're going to go right at him. So those are my thoughts on it. But it's going to be an issue, and as long as active fighters are commentating fights for people they could potentially be fighting, it's going to be an issue. So we'll see how it goes.